do you support making it legal to abort an unborn baby for any reason, up to the moment before birth?
Senator, let's have that intellectual discussion that you want.
We could start if you'd answer my question. I can't go to my next question until you answer that question. Professor Goodwin, help me understand your point of view. I think this is a yes or no question. Do you support it being legal to abort an unborn child up to the moment of birth?
Senator Kennedy, it is not a yes or no question. I support women like Ms. Zarowski. Women across this...
No, ma'am, I don't. I think it is a yes or no question.
No, well, let me answer.
If there were a law I'm just trying to understand your perspective, and I'm not accusing you of this.
Of course not.
But you know, people sort of talk around this issue. If there were a bill that said that a woman has an unfettered right to abort an unborn baby for any reason up to the moment of birth, would you vote yes or would you vote no?
Senator Kennedy, I refuse to be shackled by your question. What I have answered is that there are conditions that occur during pregnancy.
You don't know whether you would vote yes or no?
There are conditions during pregnancy that mean after 10 weeks,
no,
14 weeks,
I said
20 weeks,
discretion.
24 weeks,
you
conditions
would
such as
support,
Ms. Zarowski.
You're here advocating.
I would support her life.
I
would support her personhood.
But you're advocating a law.
I support her personhood.
You're advocating a law that says that an unborn baby can be aborted up to the moment of birth for any reason, are you not?
Let me clarify what the 14th Amendment says in the first sentence, that citizens of this United States are individuals that are born. That is what our Constitution says.
But why won't you answer my question, Professor? I'm not trying to argue. I just want to understand what your position is, and I think you're afraid to say that you do support that. If you do support it, I think you, just for the purpose of an intellectual discussion, you ought to just say so.
For purposes of an intellectual discussion, I'm happy to have that with you, but that's not the tone.
Could you answer my question? Do you support, please? I mean, you teach, okay? I'm sure you've had students ask this question. Do you support making it legal to abort an unborn baby for any reason, up to the moment before birth?
Senator, let's have that intellectual discussion that you want.
We could start if you'd answer my question. I can't go to my next question until you answer that question.
I want you to be able to go to your second and your third questions. I do. But as I have explained, there are many different conditions.
No, I said unfettered discretion, no conditions. I'm making it easy for you.
Well, I've already shared with you, Senator, that I support women's
I don't want to use all my time. You're not going to answer it, and that is your right. But I would respect you more if you just say, here's my answer.
I'm sorry that you don't respect me very much.
I do respect you, but I said I'd respect you more if you just answer my question. Doctor, tell me how to say your last name.
Rubenhorst.
Ms. Dr. Rubenhorst, do you support a law that would allow, for any reason, unfettered discretion, the abortion of an unborn child up until the moment of birth?
No.
You don't. Dr. Verma?
Senator Kennedy, so I'm the one doctor in this room that does provide abortion care, and I can tell you that does not reflect the reality of abortion care.
I understand. I'm just asking a question.
It simply doesn't
But do you support it? There are bills before Congress that will allow that to happen. You don't support it, or are you going to not answer my question?
As the doctor in this room who does provide abortion care, that is not how abortion care in this country works. It's a hypothetical that does a disservice to our
But if a patient came to you and said, I'm going to probably have a baby this week and I've changed my mind, and I would like you, doctor, to abort the child, would you do it?
That is not how abortion care in
But
this
if,
country
but if a
works.
patient did, would you do it?
My job as a doctor is to look at each
Okay.
individual situation.
I mean,
but
I'm
have
sorry, I don't
never-
mean to be rude, but I can tell neither you nor the professor will answer my question.
I
And
have
I think
nev-
you both have an opinion, and I don't understand why you won't share it.
I
We're
have
going to solve this
provided-
problem.
I've
Doctor-
provided care for a
doctor,
few
how
years,
about
and I've
you?
never
Could you-
seen that situation.
How about you, Doc? Would you?
I do not support unfettered abortion, and I would like to point out that if a woman did have a life-threatening condition in pregnancy past approximately 22 weeks, that baby can be delivered alive by induction or C-section, and we can try to save that baby. The intent of abortion is a dead baby, and that is not necessary in that situation.
I mean, I want you to all understand where I'm coming from. This is a tough issue. And it's a tough issue because there's some tough questions we've got to answer. And when you won't answer the questions, when you're invited by my Democratic friends, the majority, and you won't answer the most fundamental question, we've got a bill in front of us that will basically say a woman has the unfettered right to abort at any time for any reason up to the moment of birth. And that's a gut check issue. And I would expect you as experts to answer that truthfully, how you do it. Thank you for your indulgence, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's probably no issue in modern American politics that engenders sharper disagreement than the question of abortion. I think everyone here agrees on that. It's a deeply moral issue that reflects our values, who we are as a country. It's an emotional issue. It's a personal issue on which people feel very strongly. I believe the American people should decide abortion policy. I believe that's what our Constitution designs. Unfortunately, my Democrat colleagues on this committee disagree. They do not believe in democracy when it comes to the issue of abortion. They want unelected judges to set one standard for the entire country, and if the voters disagree, the voters have no choice. And look, the reason the Democrats want this issue to be out of the hands of the voters is quite obvious. Because the modern Democrat Party is wildly out of step with the American people on the question of abortion. The current position of virtually every Democrat senator in this body is that abortion should be absolutely unlimited, available up until the moment of birth, and even, shockingly, in some instances, after birth, that partial birth abortion should be fully legal, that there should be no parental notification and no parental consent, no matter how young the girl is who may be seeking an abortion, and that all of it should be funded by taxpayer money. Now, that is an extreme and radical view. How extreme and radical? Well, according to a Harvard-Harris poll from last year, 10% of Americans, only 10%, support abortion on demand up until the point of birth. That's the position. If you want to be a Democrat in the Senate, that's the position you have to embrace, because that's where the money is. That's where the activists are. That's where the angry voices are that fuel a Democrat campaign. But 90% of Americans look at that position and say, we disagree. And so you understand now why my Democrat colleagues don't want this decision decided by the voters. Because if 90% of the voters disagree with the extreme policy decision they've embraced, their position will not prevail at the ballot box. And by the way, it's not just the voters in the United States who disagree with Senate Democrats on this. It is virtually every voter on planet Earth. The United States is such an extreme outlier. Out of the entire country, there are only 7 countries on Earth out of the entire planet that allow abortion after 20 weeks. And yet every one of my Democrat colleagues wants to do so. Europe, virtually all of Europe, including the left-wing socialists, the Greens there, they think The Democrats in this body are loons on this issue. Sweden has an 18-week limit on seeking an abortion. None of my Democrat colleagues would vote for Sweden's law. France has a 14-week limit. France! None of my colleagues would vote for France's law. Germany and Luxembourg have 12-week limits. And the position of Democrats is 40 weeks, up until the very moment of birth, no limits at all. That's a horrifying position. I suppose my Democrat colleagues can comfort themselves with the company they're in. Communist China, Iran, and North Korea, and the National Democrat Party. They all have the same view. Those tyrannies, at least, are explicit, which is life has no value. And so they don't embrace any limits. And by the way, look, there's so much rhetoric on this issue that a skeptical listener would be justified doubting what any of us are saying. But if you don't believe what I'm saying, look to the votes. In the wake of the Supreme Court overturning Roe and sending this decision back to the voters so the voters could decide, what did my colleagues in the Senate do? Promptly voted on a bill that would strike down just about every reasonable restriction in the country that the voters have decided to legalize partial birth abortion, to provide no protection for unborn children. Those are extreme positions. And Dr. Scope, I'd like to ask you, what are the consequences of unlimited abortion on demand? What does a 40-week or a 36-week unborn child who is enduring a partial birth abortion, what does that child experience if that procedure is allowed to happen?
A partial birth abortion delivers the baby intact. So the very first thing that would happen is that the woman's cervix must be aggressively dilated to a large dilation. That is very likely to damage her cervix, and several high-quality systematic reviews have documented increased risk of preterm birth in a subsequent pregnancy after a procedure like that. So not only is it hurting her this time, it will lead to further complications such as cervical incompetence. The baby generally is not killed first. As I reported, 70% of late-term abortion providers say they do not routinely do this. These babies are highly likely to continue to live throughout the process of labor. They're delivered as a breech, and their head is crushed. So that would be the point when they would die, is when their head is crushed. Other late-term abortion, they're blind procedures in many cases. So the instruments could damage the uterus. They could puncture the uterus. There are a number of horrible consequences documented where adjacent bowel has been disrupted, urinary tract injuries, hemorrhage. There is really no reason that an abortion needs to be done that late, ever.
Thank you.
Next is Senator Lee.
From time to time, the Supreme Court corrects prior errors. It happened with Plessy versus Ferguson, which was a bad decision. We've all acknowledged that, along with Dred Scott, along with Korematsu, are bad decisions. I like it when the Supreme Court is able to correct prior errors. That is what occurred with Dobbs. Dobbs corrected a prior error. It's difficult to endure hearing people say that they're worried about the credibility of the court, when sometimes those words are uttered by people who are themselves actively, willfully, deliberately attacking the credibility of the court, sometimes as officers of the court. We're seeing this through unfair attacks on Justice Thomas and other members of the U.S. Supreme Court, and it's got to stop. Look, Dobbs was right. As a matter of constitutional law, this is a matter not for the courts to decide, but for elected lawmakers, typically in state legislatures, not our national legislature. So if you don't like the policy outcome, go to your state legislature. But this is not an issue in which the federal judiciary is somehow empowered. There is no reproductive rights clause of the U.S. Constitution. So let's not pretend that we're worried about the credibility of the court if we are simultaneously attacking the credibility of the court and its ability to do its job. Now, a lot of these issues relate to this legislation that's been introduced in the wake of the Dobbs decision, which is itself way more radical even than Roe versus Wade was, and way more radical than where Americans are comfortable going. You know, 69% of Americans are uncomfortable with abortion after the first trimester, 69%. But you'd never guess that from the way Democrats in the United States Senate vote on these issues, where essentially all of them support or appear to be comfortable with second and third trimester abortions. And in fact, all but I think 2 members of the Democratic caucus in the United States Senate voted against the Borderline Abortion Survivors Act. And so this legislation Democrats are now pushing would prohibit any state law from regulating abortion within a state's borders, essentially ever, not to protect girls, not to protect women, not to protect health, safety, and welfare, not to protect the rights of a baby born alive. Now, putting aside for a moment the life of the child, when considering the health impact of abortion on women, I think there are important considerations to make. Dr. Ingrid, Dr. Scott, I'd like to start with you. What concerns do you have for the physical and mental well-being of women who have late-term abortions?
It's well established that women who have late-term abortions are at much higher risk for mental health complications, as we mentioned, anxiety, depression, substance use and abuse, and suicidal ideation and self-harm.
Let's talk about suicide for a minute. Those who have second or third trimester abortions, late-term abortions, do they have, what do their higher suicides look like?
In the United States, we do not have data on this because, as I mentioned, backing up to maternal mortality, this is data is collected until a full year after the end of the pregnancy, and it is virtually impossible because the CDC mostly looks at death certificates. It's virtually impossible to link an say a coerced abortion and a suicide 6 months later.
Right.
And I don't think that there are many efforts to do this.
By the way, how many abortions are medically indicated, medically necessary?
Using the definition that the intent is to kill the baby, I would say none. As we discussed earlier, occasionally there is the need to do a separation of the mother and the baby. The intent in that case is to save the mother, and sometimes the baby regrettably dies. But even if you use that or if you said that, well, that counts as an abortion, it's still far less than 1% of the abortions in our country.
Very good to know. Now, as you have noted, women are 4 times more likely to experience serious medical complications from a chemical abortion as a surgical abortion. Why is the abortion industry pushing chemical abortion? Does it have more to do with the fact that this is an industry that makes a lot of money off of that? Or does it have more to do with the fact that that dispenses with a lot of inconvenient things, like the fact that we've got Planned Parenthood clinics that have been caught on tape telling girls not to tell the age of the person having the abortion, because then they would have a duty to report it. What is that? What's causing that?
I think there are definitely advantages for the abortion industry to promote chemical abortions. They don't have to hire a surgeon, pay for sterilization of instruments and the costs that go along with that. And the reality I would like to acknowledge is that, again, about 90% of obstetricians do not perform abortions, and even obstetricians who claim to be pro-choice, many of them will not perform surgical abortions. So I think there was a staffing issue that began the promotion toward chemical abortion. There may be some advantages in terms of funding, but now that we see—
Is there a profit motive, perhaps? Could that—
There was a time that the cost of a surgical abortion and a chemical abortion were approximately the same, an average of about $575. But I think we also see, in light of states beginning to have pro-life restrictions, that this is a way to get around those restrictions and provide abortions in states that are trying to protect unborn life.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I see my time has expired.